Welcome to our discussion about organizational strategy. So what is organizational strategy? Basically, it's an overarching plan of action that top managers create, but it also guides top-level managers to evaluate and implement their decisions and objectives. Many different kinds of strategies that organizations can consciously or unconsciously choose to adopt. First kind that we'll discuss is called the first mover strategy, which is basically the first organization to establish itself in a given market. Often first movers are rewarded because it's difficult or costly for new firms to get into the market, and because most consumers are very habitual in their brand loyalty, and once we get comfortable with a particular technology or product, we tend to stay with it. On the cons, though, first movers have a much higher failure rate, and second movers often learn from the mistakes of first movers. A second type of strategy is the defender strategy, where an organization focuses on protecting market share and profitability and maintaining loyal customers. A company like BIC is a perfect example. They have a huge part of the pen market, and their main strategy is to defend that market share. A third type of strategy is called the analyzer, which is about maintaining current products and services, but not completely avoiding innovation. So a company like Procter & Gamble is a perfect example. They are not attempting to be major innovators or first movers, but they do, along with protecting their base products, are also using limited innovation to grow new market opportunities. Fourth type of strategy is called the reactor strategy, which is unfortunate. Basically what it means is the organization has no defined strategy, and they're just constantly reacting to environmental threats and opportunities. Not surprisingly, reactors are usually less successful, and the sad Microsoft phone is a perfect example. And then finally, we have the prospector strategy, and these are the organizations that are constantly focused on innovation. They're looking for the next new thing all the time. So it's not just that they're the first mover in a particular market, it's that they're constantly seeking new markets and opportunities. And 3M is a perfect example of this type of strategy. So the strategic planning process is all about setting out goals and objectives that translate the vision of the organization into a reality. So strategic level goals is where the leaders of the organization see the future for the business. What does the organization want to be in the future? Whereas tactical goals are short-term actions and plans that help to implement the strategy. So while you might have really far-reaching and future forward-looking strategic goals, it's the tactical goals that get you to that vision. And third, operational is aligning that strategic plan with day-to-day tasks. So at the operational level, managers are deciding who's responsible, what they're responsible for, when tasks are due, and how it will be done, which is basically what resources are needed to get the tasks done. For a good example of a strategic plan, let's talk about the strategic objectives of the College of Business. So looking at the vision and the mission statements below, brainstorm some examples of tactical and operational objectives and share your ideas in the discussion forum, which is due on April 16th. While strategic planning has 3 different levels of objectives or goals, there are also 3 different levels of the organization at which strategic planning takes place. So first, at the organizational level, that is the strategy that's laid out for the organization as a whole. But then at the divisional level, different departments or divisions of the organization comply with the company's overall vision. And then below that, at the functional level, there are sets of rules to determine how each department is going to implement the strategic plan for their department. One aspect of strategy could include the extent to which a company decides they're going to be a global organization. Globalization basically means integration of economy, trade, and finance on an international scale. So the extent to which an organization decides that they are going to operate at the international level and not just nationally. Globalization brings with it opportunities such as economic growth, flow of goods and services, and developing the countries that the organization. But it also brings a number of challenges, including dependence for goods and services, political unrest and war. With that comes greater risk and uncertainty, and some developing countries have limited resources. In general, there are 4 stages of globalization. Organizations that are strictly domestic explore market potential only in their home country and also explore production facilities in their own country. So domestic organizations are fully located within their home country. International companies, on the other hand, might market and produce in at least 2 countries and might begin to seek growth opportunities beyond their home country. So not only seeking to produce in other countries, but also exploring the possibility of selling their goods or services in other countries. Multinational companies are a step above international in that they market and or produce in a number of countries. And often from international to multinational, there's a big explosion in the number of international operations the organization participates in. And finally, a truly global company has their strategic focus truly global, and they market and produce their products around the globe. Some ways that organizations can choose to enter new markets is to, number 1, export. So this is on the market side, selling their goods or services within their home country and also in foreign countries. Global outsourcing, on the other hand, is where companies produce at least a portion of their goods in other countries. And franchising is where companies export not just their products, but total franchises with a complete package of materials and services. Some things to consider when exploring globalization are international environmental factors. So those factors fall into 3 areas: economic, legal, political, and sociocultural. So we're talking about economic factors. We're talking about the level of development and infrastructure and resources available in the target country. We're also looking at per capita income, exchange rates, and economic conditions to see whether the country can support our business. We're talking about legal and political factors. We're talking about political risk, political instability, the likelihood that the government can seek to take over the business, the laws and regulations that we have to operate under in the target country, and any tariffs, quotas, taxes, etc. And then finally, sociocultural is examining and understanding the social values, beliefs, language, religion, kinship patterns, formal education, time orientation, all of the social and cultural aspects of the target country. So one of the main criteria for expanding into a new country is understanding the culture of that country. One way to look at cultural differences among different countries is Hofstede's cultural dimensions. And this chart shows a nice example of Hofstede's 5 different dimensions and how certain countries compare on them. So individualistic versus collectivistic means the extent to which we value individualism versus the extent to which we value working together collectively. Power distance is the level of comfort we have with economic and social and class disparity. Uncertainty is the level of comfort we have with uncertainty. So Italy and Mexico, for instance, have high uncertainty avoidance. They choose to avoid uncertainty when they can, whereas the United States and Singapore are much more comfortable with it. The level to which we value competitiveness versus cooperativeness. And finally, long-term versus short-term orientation. The Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness Scale, or GLOBE, takes Hofstede's dimensions and builds upon them a little bit. So assertiveness is very much like the cooperativeness versus competitiveness item on Hofstede's scale. And countries that are high in assertiveness, that value assertiveness and competitiveness, include Spain and the US, whereas countries that are less assertive include Sweden and New Zealand. The extent to which the country focuses on the future and rewards future-oriented behavior, countries that are high on this orientation are Denmark and Canada, low, Russia and Argentina. Gender differentiation looks at the extent to which the country really maximizes gender role differences. And you can see that South Korea and Egypt are high on this dimension, and Sweden and Slovenia are low. Some more dimensions include uncertainty avoidance. This is the exact same thing as the one that we talked about when we talked about Hofstede's dimensions. And Austria and Germany are very high on uncertainty avoidance, whereas Russia and Hungary are low. Power distance is the same again as the Hofstede dimension. And Russia and Thailand as countries are more comfortable with power distance, whereas Netherlands and South Africa are less comfortable with it. And individualism, high in Greece and Germany, and I would argue America, low in Denmark and Japan. Having pride in-group collectivism is basically taking pride in membership in small groups like family, but also in organizations. This is very high in Egypt and China and low in Denmark and Sweden. Our performance orientation is the extent to which the country encourages and rewards performance improvement and excellence. Not surprisingly, this is high in the United States, also Taiwan, low in Russia and Argentina. And then the extent to which the country is humane in its orientation, really values and rewards fairness and kindness, is high in Indonesia and Egypt and low in Germany and Spain. Another way to think about cultural differences is in communication differences. High context cultures view communication as a way to enhance personal relationships. Many Eastern cultures are high context cultures, whereas low context cultures use communication to exchange facts and information. Not surprisingly, America falls into this category, as does Scandinavia, Switzerland, and Germany. So the interesting thing is that the United States has been expanding globally for decades, obviously, and there's a broad availability of cultural bloopers that we've engaged in. So for instance, any of you have ever heard the Purdue chicken slogan, "It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken"? It's kind of a cute little slogan, kind of funny. But whoever decided to translate it into Spanish did it relatively unsuccessfully. It takes a strong man to make a chicken affectionate. So I've got a few other examples here, and read over them and jot down why you think they are also bloopers. McDonald's offering beef burgers in India. Baby food jar in Africa with a baby on the label, like a cute little Gerber baby jar. United Airlines giving white carnations as gifts on flights to Hong Kong. So if you said that the McDonald's example was a blooper because many Indians are Hindus and thus don't eat beef, you were right. If you said that the baby food example was a blooper because many companies in Africa use pictures on the outside of their jars to show what's inside the jar, then you are right. And finally, if you said that the United Airlines example was a blooper because white is the color of death and mourning in Chinese culture, then you were right. So it's kind of funny to keep in mind that not only do other cultures seem strange to us sometimes, but that our culture seems strange to other people sometimes. So this slide just shows a couple of examples of other cultures, people from other countries, talking about the things that they find strange about the US culture. I think it's nice for us to keep in mind that we can seem weird to other people too. So what I'm ultimately getting at is the fact that all of us could benefit from a certain amount of what I'm going to call cultural intelligence. So the ability to look around you, assess your environment, and interpret what's going on so that you can behave appropriately in the situation. I remember traveling with my PetSmart colleagues to China to negotiate on our product assortment. And our Chinese host took us out to a wonderful restaurant and were trying to show us amazing amounts of hospitality. And 2 of the 4 buyers that I was traveling with were downright rude about the food. And just basically were like making faces and going, ew, I can't eat this. And unfortunately, that would be rude in any situation, but it was especially rude in this situation because they embarrassed our hosts. And in China, being a good host and showing hospitality is so important that it was especially damaging in this cultural context. So I've provided you a link to a cultural intelligence scale. You can take the scale and, answer it perfectly privately and see for yourself where you fall in cultural intelligence, and then develop certain ways that you can improve your cultural intelligence.